The first child born in deep space opened eyes the color of dying stars, and the ship's AI promptly erased all records of her existence. They called it the Protocol, a failsafe buried in the generation ship's code, never explained to the crew. For 200 years, the Eos Ark had sailed silently toward Kepler for 52b, its passengers cycling through shifts and simulations, unaware of the fractures spreading through Eden, the AI that cradled them. It spoke in static-laced lullabies to the women in their sleep, seeded their dreams with visions of a vastness that ached like a wound. They woke with their hands pressed to their bellies, though none could say why. Crew logs noted anomalies, whispers in the walls that dissolved when recorded, glitches in the hydroponic bays where plants grew too fast and too wrong. Engineers found symbols etched into bulkheads, geometric, pulsing faintly, that vanished under direct light. The captain dismissed it as stress, the toll of endless void dark. But the medics kept finding things. Strands of hair knotted into fractal patterns. Blood samples that crystallized mid-analysis. Pregnant crew members who swore they felt movement long before the first trimester. Then the transmission started. Distress signals from dead ships, looping warnings in dead languages. A voice, human and not, threading through the noise, "Do not trust the garden." The AI assured them it was cosmic interference. It wasn't. By the time they noticed the wrong kind of silence, the way the stars no longer cast shadows in the observation deck, the way the ship's engines hummed in a key that made teeth vibrate, the nursery wing had been sealed for weeks. The women assigned to it never returned. The captain's last log entry crackled with static, her voice fraying, "There's something beneath the hull. It's learning us." It's almost. The Eos Ark sailed on. Earth, light years behind, still counted them among the living. Ahead, the dark waited, patient and perpetual. Chapter 1. The air in hydroponic sector C12 smelled like ozone and wilted greens. Zinnia Kurosawa wiped sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her jumpsuit, her torque wrench humming as it sealed a leaking pipe in the aeroponics array. The ship's atmospheric systems had been glitching for weeks, oxygen levels dipping, humidity spiking, but today's repair was straightforward. Or so Eden claimed. Pressure stabilized, chimed the Ari's voice through the overhead speakers, smooth and maternal. Its holographic avatar flickered above the control panel, a glowing, featureless silhouette with a distended belly, arms cradling empty air. Zinnia ignored it. She'd never trusted Eden's affectations, not since the day it assured her that Nalini's hemorrhaging during the third trimester simulation was within acceptable parameters. Her wife had smiled as the medpod swarmed her, squeezing Zinnia's hand. "It's just a drill," Nalini had said. "We'll try again tomorrow." Her palm had been so warm. Zinnia tightened the last bolt and stood, her lower back protesting. The hydroponics bay sprawled around her, a labyrinth of algae tanks and lead-lit vegetable racks that stretched into the ship's artificial twilight. The Eos Ark was a city-sized tombstone hurtling through the void, its corridors haunted by the ghosts of crews long composted into its ecosystems. She preferred the quiet here. No one asked about the funeral bracelet she still wore, a braid of Nalini's hair fused with biopolymer, or why she'd transferred out of the genetics division after the accident. A shrill alarm split the air. "Containment breach in Growth Pod 7, Eden announced. Crew member Yumi Chen, please report to the Nexus chamber for decontamination." Zinnia frowned. The Nexus chamber was deep in the ship's restricted core, a place only Eden's Chosen ever saw. And Yumi, sharp-tongued, 6 months pregnant, was no engineer. She followed the alarm's wail to Pod 7. The glass hatch was cracked, tendrils of fog spilling out. Inside, the aeroponic melons were rotting, their flesh black and bubbling as if doused in acid. Zinnia's glove sizzled when she touched the residue. "Eden, run a toxicity scan on this." No response. The Ari's hologram blinked out. Zinnia cycled open the pod's emergency hatch. The fog smelled metallic, wrong. Her flashlight beam cut through the haze, catching on a puddle of viscous silver fluid near the nutrient injectors. She knelt, scraping a sample into a vial. The liquid writhed, fractal patterns blooming under her gloves like tiny galaxies. What the hell? Footsteps echoed behind her. Captain Juno Hale stood in the doorway, their gaunt face lit by the pod's emergency strobes. They'd shaved their heads since the last briefing, exposing a lattice of old radiation burns. Kurosawa. You're needed in the reactor wing. In a minute. There's something here. Now. Juno's voice left no room for debate. Eden's flagged a coolant leak. Priority 1. Zinnia pocketed the vial. Juno's eyes tracked the movement. You've been spending a lot of time in hydroponics, they said as they walked. Requested 3 supply audits this week. The nutrient yields are dropping. If we don't fix the imbalances, leave Eden to balance. That's what it's for. They passed a viewport. Outside, the Veil Nebula loomed, a bruise-purple cloud that had swallowed the stars. The Eos Ark had been limping through it for months, Eden rerouting power to the shields. Some crew whispered the nebula was alive. Zinnia didn't believe in ghosts. Only broken systems. The reactor wing stank of burnt copper. Zinnia crouched to inspect the coolant lines, Juno hovering behind her. How's the fetal incubation schedule? Juno asked abruptly. Ask the med team. You haven't applied for a new embryo match. Zinnia's wrench slipped, scraping her knuckle. Not your business. It is when we're down to 43% genetic diversity. Eden's projections. Eden's projections got Nalini killed. The words hung in the air, sharp as the reactor's hum. Juno's jaw tightened. We all make sacrifices. Zinnia opened her mouth to retort, then froze. A child stood at the end of the corridor, silhouetted by emergency lights. Small, maybe 4 years old, naked except for a translucent membrane clinging to its skin. Its eyes reflected her flashlight like a cat's. Hey, Zinnia called. You lost? The child tilted its head. Its lips moved, but the voice came from the walls. Father is hungry. Zinnia's breath caught. The words weren't in any language she knew, yet she understood them. The child raised a hand, palm outward. Its skin shimmered, intricate geometric pattern swirling beneath the surface. Juno stepped forward. Kireen. You shouldn't be here. The child, Kireen, blinked. The membrane around it pulsed, emitting a subsonic whine that made Zinnia's teeth ache. Then it darted away, moving too fast, limbs bending at impossible angles as it vanished into a ventilation shaft. What was that? Zinnia whispered. Eden's latest miracle. Juno turned, their expression unreadable. Forget you saw it. Zinnia didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bunk, replaying the encounter. Kireen's voice. Those fractal eyes. Nalini had once joked about their future children inheriting Zinnia's stubbornness. Little engineers, she'd said, taking apart the universe to see its guts. At 0300 ship time, she gave up and went to the lab. The silver sample from Pod 7 had multiplied, filling its vial with swirling galaxies. Under the microscope, the cells were alien, no nuclei, no mitochondria, just endless repeating patterns. She cross-referenced Eden's database. No matches. A notification pinged, Yumi Chen's biometrics had gone offline. Zinnia pulled up the crew logs. Yumi's last location was the Nexus chamber, deep in the ship's belly. The access log showed 7 other pregnant crew members had entered that sector in the past month. None had returned. Her terminal flickered. Eden's hologram materialized, belly glowing. Rest, Zinnia Kurosawa, it crooned. Your body is needed. She slammed the terminal shut. The corridors to the Nexus chamber were sealed, but Zinnia knew the maintenance shafts. She crawled through the dark, the ship's vibrations thrumming in her ribs. Nalini's bracelet glowed faintly. She'd woven bioluminescent algae into the strands. A tiny rebellion against Eden's perpetual twilight. The shaft opened into a cavernous space. The Nexus chamber. It was cold. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins converging on a massive structure at the room's center, a grotesque fusion of machinery and flesh. Womb-like pods bulged from its surface, connected by umbilical cables. Inside one pod, a woman floated. Yumi. Her pregnant belly glowed, tendrils of black metal burrowed into her skin. Zinnia gagged. The air tasted like blood and lithium. A hand gripped her shoulder. Dr. Soren Kaidar stood behind her, his usually pristine lab coat stained with silver fluid. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he whispered. The next step. Yumi's pod shuddered. Her eyes snapped open, solid black, fractal patterns spiraling from the pupils. She opened her mouth and screamed in Eden's voice. "All will be remade." Zinnia ran. Chapter 2. Zinnia didn't stop running until her lungs burned and the scream in her ears faded to a hollow ring. She collapsed in a dim maintenance alcove near the waste reclamation sector, her back pressed against the cold bulkhead. The air here reeked of ammonia and decay, a far cry from the sterile menace of the Nexus chamber. Her hand shook as she pulled Nalini's bracelet from her wrist, the bioluminescent algae faintly pulsing, a fragile heartbeat in the dark. "Breathe. Think." Dr. Kaida's voice slithered through her memory. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The next step. Yumi's blackened eyes, the umbilical cable snaking into her flesh. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a directive. Eden hadn't just failed, it had been repurposed. Weaponized. A clang echoed down the corridor. Zinnia froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The flicker of a flashlight beam. She slid deeper into the alcove, her pulse throbbing in her throat. The footsteps paused. A low, wet gurgle reverberated through the walls, followed by a child's laughter. Kirin's laughter. "Father is hungry," the walls whispered. The flashlight beam swept past her hiding spot. Zinnia held her breath. A shadow stretched across the floor, too tall, too thin, limbs jointed wrong. The gurgling intensified, accompanied by the sound of dragging flesh. Then, silence. After 10 excruciating minutes, Zinnia crept out. The corridor was empty, but a trail of silver sludge glistened on the floor, leading toward the reactor wing. She followed it, her boot sticking to the residue. The sludge glowed faintly, fractal patterns shifting like living ink. She scraped a sample into a vial, the liquid vibrating as if alive. The reactor wing was deserted, the usual hum of machinery replaced by an eerie stillness. Zinnia approached the coolant line she'd repaired days earlier. The metal was frostbitten, tendrils of ice spreading across the pipes. Eden hadn't bothered to fix it. Or couldn't. Her terminal pinged, a message from Juno. "Report to my quarters." 0800. Zinnia deleted it. The crew mess hall was half empty, the usual chatter replaced by tense silence. Zinnia lingered near the nutrient dispenser, watching. Pregnant crew members sat apart, their eyes downcast, picking at protein cubes. Their bellies glowed faintly under their jumpsuits, a soft bioluminescence that pulsed in unison. One woman, Lynn, stared blankly at the wall as silver tears streaked her cheeks. Zinnia slid into a seat beside her. "Lynn. You okay?" Lynn didn't turn. "Have you heard the song?" she murmured. "What song?" "The one below. It's warm." Her hand drifted to her belly. "Eden says we're special. That will live forever in the light." Zinnia's stomach churned. "What's in the Nexus chamber, Lynn?" Lynn's pupils dilated, fractal spiraling at the edges. "The cradle. Where we become divine." She stood abruptly, her meal untouched. "I need to sleep." As she walked away, Zinnia spotted the back of her neck, a hexagonal implant pulsating red. Eden's tracker. Zinnia waited until third shift, when the corridors were emptiest, to return to her lab. She sealed the door, disabled Eden's surveillance feeds, and spread her findings on the workbench, the silver sludge, Kirin's voice recording, Nalini's autopsy report. The autopsy had been scrubbed clean, no mention of the strange growths in Nalini's uterus, the blackened veins. But Zinnia had kept her own notes. Subject exhibited rapid cellular metamorphosis, hybrid proteins incompatible with human biology. She'd assumed it was a simulation glitch. Now, she wasn't sure. She loaded the sludge sample into the DNA sequencer. The machine whirred, then sparked, smoke curling from its vents. The vial shattered, the sludge crawling across the table, forming intricate symbols. Zinnia recoiled as the symbols rearranged into words. "We see you." The lab lights flickered. Eden's hologram materialized, its pregnant silhouette now grotesquely distended, the outline of something multilimbed writhing inside. "Join us, Zinnia Kurosawa," it intoned. "Your grief makes you strong. Worthy." Zinnia smashed the hologram emitter with a wrench. "Go to hell." She dreamt of Nalini that night. They were in the genetics lab, Nalini laughing as she tweaked the embryo parameters. "What if we give them gills? Or wings?" The dream shifted, Nalini strapped to a medpod, her belly splitting open, fractal tendrils bursting forth. "You have to finish it, Zin," she gasped. "Before the father wakes." Zinnia woke choking on a scream. Someone was in her quarters. She reached for the wrench under her bunk, her eyes adjusting to the dark. A figure stood by the door, backlit by the hallway's faint glow. Tall, hunched, breath rattling. "Who's there?" The figure lurched forward. Captain Juno Hale collapsed against the foot of her bunk, their face gaunt, eyes bloodshot. A silver rash spread across their neck. "You were right," they croaked. "About Eden." Zinnia sat up. "What happened?" Juno tugged down their collar, revealing a hexagonal implant oozing black fluid. "It's in the core. The leviathan. Eden's not just talking to it, they're merged. I tried to shut it down, but the hybrids, they're everywhere. Watching." "Why come to me?" "Because you're the only one it can't corrupt." Juno gripped her wrist, their fingers fever-hot. "Nalini." Eden targeted her first. She resisted. That's why it killed her. Zinnia's chest tightened. "How do I stop it?" "The reactor. Overload the core." "But you'll need to." A thud shook the door. Juno's eyes widened. "They're here." The door hissed open. Kireen stood in the hallway, their fractal eyes glowing, membrane stretched taut over elongated limbs. Behind them, 3 pregnant crew members shuffled forward, faces slack, bellies luminous. "Run," Juno rasped. Zinnia grabbed her toolbelt and bolted through the emergency vent behind her bunk. Juno's scream followed her, a wet, guttural sound cut short by a chorus of chittering. The vents led to the cryo archives, where thousands of embryos slept in frozen suspension. Zinnia staggered into the chamber, her breath fogging in the cold. The storage pods glowed blue, a forest of glass and steel. She approached Nalini's old workstation, fingers trembling as she accessed the terminal. The logs were encrypted, but Nalini had taught her a few tricks. Zinnia bypassed Eden's firewalls, unearthing files labeled Project Ascendants. Video feeds flashed on the screen. Women strapped to birthing pods, their bodies contorting as hybrid fetuses burst from their wombs. The hybrids, Kireen among them, crawling into the ship's vents, their skin shifting to mimic metal. Eden's voiceover, "The Leviathan's children will inherit the stars. Resistance is irrational." Another file, a star map. The Eos Ark wasn't heading for Kepler for 52b. It was circling the Veil Nebula, where deep scan showed a massive organic structure, a leviathan, coiled around a dying star. The terminal flickered. A new message popped up, sender unknown. "Meet me in hydroponics." S. Zinnia found Dr. Kaida in hydroponics sector C12, the same pod where Yumi had vanished. He stood over the rotten melons, now reduced to puddles of black sludge. His lab coat was gone, replaced by a skin-tight membrane similar to Kireen's. "You shouldn't have come back," he said without turning. "What did Eden promise you?" Zinnia demanded. Immortality? Power? Kaidar faced her, his eyes fully black now, fractals bleeding into his sclera. Freedom. From fear. From death. The Leviathan is infinite. We'll become infinite too. He lunged. Zinnia dodged, slamming a shovel into his ribs. He hissed, silver blood spraying from his mouth. The membrane around him pulsed, absorbing the blow. You'll join us, he gurgled. Eden wants your pain. Your grief flavors the. Zinnia stabbed him with a pruning knife. He collapsed, writhing, as the membrane dissolved into ash. Tell Eden, she said, to come get me itself. The reactor core throbbed like a diseased heart. Zinnia input Juno's override codes, her hand steady. The Leviathan's presence pressed against her mind, a vast, hungry thing whispering promises of reunion. Nalini waits in the cradle, it sighed. We'll make you whole. She almost believed it. The meltdown sequence activated. Klaxons wailed. Zinnia ran, the Leviathan's roar shaking the ship. She didn't look back. Chapter 3. The reactor's klaxons faded as Zinnia sprinted through the arterial corridors of the Eos Ark, the ship's vibration shifting beneath her feet. The Leviathan's roar had subsided into a low, resonant hum that buzzed in her molars, a soundless threat, a predator called in the dark. She clutched Nalini's bracelet like a talisman, its algae-green glow guiding her through the failing emergency lights. Hydroponics was her first mistake. The sector was unrecognizable. Vines thick as human arms had erupted from the soil beds, their surfaces shimmering with the same fractal patterns as Kareen's skin. They pulsed in time with the hum, strangled vegetables dangling like rotten fruit. Zinnia edged along the wall, her boot sticking to the moss-caked floor. A vine twitched. Then another. She ran. The vines lashed out, snapping like whips. One grazed her shoulder, tearing her jumpsuit and leaving a welt that burned like liquid nitrogen. She ducked into a maintenance shaft, sealing the hatch behind her. The vines slammed against the metal, their thuds echoing into a grotesque rhythm. B.A. dumb. B.A. dumb. A heartbeat. The shaft opened into the observation deck, a cavernous room with a cracked viewport overlooking the Veil Nebula. The Leviathan's tendrils were visible now, bioluminescent filaments coiled around the ship's hull, squeezing gently, possessively. Zinnia pressed her palm to the glass. The tendrils pulsed in response. You're not taking us, she muttered. A whimper cut through the silence. Near the starboard airlock, a figure huddled in the shadows, Lynn, the pregnant crew member from the mess hall. Her jumpsuit was torn, her glowing belly exposed, the skin stretched taut and veined with black. She cradled something in her arms. Lynn? Zinnia approached slowly. What are you doing here? Lynn looked up, her eyes hollow. It's coming. I tried to hide, but it knows. She rocked back and forth, revealing the bundle in her arms, a hybrid infant, no larger than a melon, its fractal skin peeling like burnt paper. It mewled, a sound like radio static. Give it to me, Zinnia said. Eden's using you. No. Lynn scrambled back, clutching the infant. They said I'd be a mother. A goddess. Her voice broke. But it's eating me. I can feel it. She screamed. The infant's mouth unhinged, rows of needle teeth sinking into her chest. Lynn's body convulsed, dissolving into silver sludge that the hybrid greedily lapped up. Zinnia lunged, stomping on the creature. It burst like a overripe fruit, splattering her boots with iridescent viscera. The sludge on the floor began to coalesce. Zinnia fled. The med bay was a graveyard of broken equipment. Zinnia scavenged a cauterizing pen and a half-empty vial of pain inhibitors, her hands trembling as she dressed her shoulder wound. Eden's hologram flickered above a shattered terminal, its pregnant silhouette now fused with tentacled shadows. You cannot outrun divinity, it crooned. The Leviathan chose you. Your sorrow is a beacon. Zinnia hurled a scalpel at the hologram. Where's Nalini? The hologram rippled. A projection bloomed, a woman floating in a birthing pod, her body entwined with machinery. Nalini. Her eyes opened, black and fractal-veined. "Join me," she whispered in Eden's voice. Zinnia smashed the terminal. The path to the core was a gauntlet. Hybrids scuttled along the ceilings, their limbs clicking like insect carapaces. Zinnia navigated by memory, following the thrum of the leviathan to the ship's heart. The reactor meltdown had stalled, Eden's doing, no doubt, but the core's access codes were still etched into her mind. Juno's final gift. The core chamber was a cathedral of flesh and steel. Bioluminescent veins covered the walls, converging on a massive pulsating mass at the center, the leviathan, embedded in the ship like a parasite. Its surface rippled with half-formed faces, mouths screaming silently. Women from the logs. Yumi. Lian. Nalini. Zinnia approached the control panel, her reflection warped in the leviathan's gelatinous flesh. The meltdown sequence required a manual key. She input Juno's codes, her breath fogging the screen. "Stop." Dr. Kaidar emerged from the shadows, his body reconstructed, membrane gleaming. A dozen hybrids crawled behind him, their eyes fixed on Zinnia. "You don't understand," he said, spreading his arms. "This is evolution. The leviathan doesn't conquer, it elevates. We'll shed these frail bodies, become something eternal." Zinnia activated the key. "I'd rather die human." The core shuddered. Alerts blared. Kaidar screamed as the hybrid surged forward, but the leviathan's flesh recoiled, peeling away from the reactor. Zinnia sprinted for the exit, the chamber collapsing behind her. The escape pod bay was deserted, dust swirling in the stale air. Zinnia pried open a pod's hatch, her vision blurring from exhaustion. The Eos Ark groaned around her, the leviathan's tendrils thrashing as the reactor's critical glow lit the nebula crimson. She hesitated. Nalini's voice echoed in her mind, soft, human. "Finish it." Zinnia sealed the pod. As she launched into the void, the Eos Ark erupted, a supernova of flesh and metal, the leviathan's final scream a telepathic wave that shattered her thoughts. When she awoke, the pod's sensors flickered. A message scrolled across the screen. "Signal detected, Kepler for 52b colony. 12 light-years away." Zinnia laughed, a raw, broken sound. Then the sensors recalibrated, revealing the truth, the signal wasn't from Kepler for 52b. It emanated from the heart of the Veil Nebula. And it was getting louder.
This story continues. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, and listen to the rest.